Ever wondered how a simple idea can spark real change across Africa? Meet Jermaine Craig, founder of Kwanda, a modern initiative where members of the African diaspora pool funds to support impactful community-led projects across the continent. Born in the UK to Nigerian parents, Jermaine grew up watching his parents send money back home each month. But when he came of age, he found himself questioning that approach. Was there a more sustainable way for him and other diasporans like him to support their communities across Africa? That question sparks the creation of Kwanda, a digital village now 2,000 plus members strong, collectively funding impactful projects across 10 African countries, from education and healthcare to clean energy and entrepreneurship. And it's working. More than $220,000 has already been deployed directly into the hands of change makers on the ground. So how does a digital village like Kwanda actually work? What drives Jermaine to revolutionize diasporan philanthropy? And why does he believe structure is the real key to African prosperity? Find out in this episode of Black and Borderless. Welcome to the first episode of Black and Borderless. I'm your host, Kate Endeley. And if you don't already know, Black and Borderless is essentially a podcast that highlights change makers who are helping build and grow what we call a global Black economy. And those are people who are helping build bridges between the diaspora and the people on the continent, and even fostering global connections between people of African descent all over the world. So today we're honored to have our first guest, hopefully our first guest, Jermaine Craig. Welcome, Jermaine.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be the first guest. I think we can make this a special one. We look good.
We have to. Like I said, we're both on a journey today, so it's going to be great. So Jermaine is the founder of Kwanda, and Kwanda is a digital platform, a community really of individuals across the African diaspora who are pooling resources to fund Black-led grassroots initiatives. So I'm pretty excited to talk to him because I personally have been following him on LinkedIn for some time now. And as a marketer, or as they say in the UK, a marketeer, I find his communication on LinkedIn to be brilliant, and he's really great at branding himself. And I'm really excited about this Kwanda initiative, and I really think it's something that we all need to know about. So Jermaine, welcome, and let's get into it to talk more about Kwanda.
Okay, sure. Yeah, let's do it. What would you like to know?
So let's start with you, because this is kind of a cultural podcast, in as much as it's an economy about like socioeconomics. I like to start by talking about who you are as a person. So tell me about Jermaine. Where did you grow up? Where do you live now?
Okay, so I grew up in London, in a Nigerian household, although I did realize quite recently, well, not too recently, but about a year ago, that I'm half Ghanaian as well. And, I grew up in a community. I grew up in a council estate, which is kind of, I guess, the equivalent to projects in America or something like that. And I used to say it's a playground for children and a prison for adults. All the adults want to get out of there, and like children just love it because there's parks everywhere. Like we're all like in a tight like area. Like I get to play with my friends every day. And so that was my upbringing. Our house was very much like one of the party houses where people could all come in. And then one day I was essentially pulled out of that and I moved to Nigeria. And that was the first time I kind of came away from what I understood to be community. And in Nigeria, I didn't want to go to Nigeria necessarily. I saw it as possibly a fun little thing we could do for a while, but ultimately I was like, no, I want to be back home with all my friends. And so that was the first time I saw myself as an outsider. I could speak Yoruba. My parents taught me the language, but I was in a somewhat different culture relative to how I grew up. And I think since then, I also moved around quite a lot generally. And since then, there was this kind of itch I had in me to move around. Like I didn't have that grounding. And I guess from that point on, I've always been seeking out community. Where do I fit in? Where do people who think like me gather, and how can I find them? And that's been an ongoing search. And so the internet for me was a boom, because that's the first time I was able to put my ideas out into some form of a world and then find people that resonated. And so that was like my early childhood. It was, growing up in this tight-knit community, moving to Nigeria, experiencing Nigeria as a country, but then also losing that community, and then basically grappling with those two things: identity, where do I belong? Is it Nigeria? Is it England? Is it somewhere else? So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think those are all points or experiences that I think most bicultural or first gen kids can identify with. I, as a first gen American, sort of. My mother is African American. My dad is a Cameroonian immigrant who settled in the US in the early '80s. And I also went to live in Cameroon for some time with my grandparents. So I completely understand that kind of like belonging to both places, but neither at the same time. And then seeking community. And what the digital space does create is a place for you to find people who are also bicultural like yourself, or who are kind of like third culture people, and kind of form your own community. So that completely makes sense. So tell me, what was the most exciting thing about your upbringing, both in England and also even your time in Nigeria, that you can like the most exciting memory?
In England, it was definitely the community. Specifically, like, there's one story I always go back to, or one thing we used to do is we used to throw these, I guess you would call them a block party, but they definitely took place in the home. And we have many photo albums where you can flick through, you just see strangers all over the place. But it was essentially an open door. It was like there's Nigerian music blasting out of the house. There's Nigerian food, there's sweets, there's all of these things, and people would just come in the house and experience our culture. So when we invited, our family members, my cousins, I had a bunch of cousins that we'd all play around. But then also you just have strangers almost saying, what's going on in there? And my mom and dad would just welcome them in, like, this is a Nigerian household. This is what happens. So like those memories always kind of stick out for me, like that sense of community, bringing people to our community.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely a memory that that I think of fondly.
And what about your time in Nigeria? Or how many years were you in Nigeria? How many?
So, I was in Nigeria twice, for 1 year at a time. And so was in Nigeria when I was around, I think, 6 or 7, and another time when I was around 10 or 11. So that was like me going into secondary school or high school. Fond memories from Nigeria. There were so many, but Nigeria was a place where we, like, me and my siblings, I have 4 siblings, we almost had to rebuild on our identities, but then also our sense of what is fun, like what do we do with our time. So yeah, I think my fondest memories were just sitting in the back of like the car, looking out onto the Lagos market or the streets of Ibadan, and just seeing like the vibrancy and the things that people were doing. People were built. You'd see people building things with plastic or rubber wires, and it was just always fascinating. It just felt like, and Lagos is a place where you'll never be bored. So it was like a film. I was young. I was sitting in the back of the car and just watching. And that's really what I remember. I just remember looking
Yeah.
onto like pizza there,
Kind of.
and yeah, being very present, like not really even having an opinion on what I was seeing, but just being there.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. And I bet now, looking back, you can probably, like, in retrospect, process some of the things that you were seeing, and maybe they've even influenced what you're doing now, which we'll talk about, in a little bit. So let's go down to, what was the most challenging thing about your upbringing, you think?
I think it was that sense of not being in community or not belonging. I still don't even know why that was such an important thing in my life, but I think, one, I physically left community, but then two, in my mind, things started shifting. I started seeing myself as different, whether that's different relative to the stereotype of a young Black Nigerian growing up in the UK, whether that's different in terms of, value systems. And so a quick story was, and this is kind of, I think, the story that really brought me into the world I exist in today, is I remember we used to play football outside in the park every day. Like, this was the thing. Like, my friends they come to my house, they wake me up, they're like, let's go and play football.
Mhm.
And something started shifting in my brain, which is like a function of who I am today. But I remember I started getting bored of football. It almost felt like we're doing the same thing every day. And I was thinking of a way to make the whole experience more stimulating. And so what I ended up doing, which is very nerdy, but I went back to my house and I pulled up a notebook and I basically created my version of a football league.
Mm.
And what I would do is when I do go out and play football, I'm physically playing football, but in my head, I'm also like making transfers and ranking people. And it was just a way of making this whole thing a lot more stimulating. And then I realized that over time, even that got boring. And I was like, okay, I need something even more complex and stimulating to stick my teeth into. And that evolved into me basically creating like a simulation of the world in a notebook. And I remember, I basically formed my own like twin world, and there was economies and there were airlines, there were trade wars. And this is when I'm like, I don't know, 6 or 7.
Mhm, mhm.
And I basically just done it just to give myself something complicated to think about. And then that's when I really started seeing a shift where, I talk to my friends about this stuff and they're like, huh? Like what sort of this stuff we're doing? And then, but fortunately, my mom saw me doing that. And she essentially said, there's something called Microsoft Excel that you could model all of this stuff on. And that was my introduction to the computer and then later on the internet.
Wow.
So it's something that I guess initially started off as a challenge, but then really like laid the foundation for where I am today.
Absolutely. Like when we talk about your work in a little bit, and we'll get to that. Like, I think in everyone's life, I think you see little snippets of who you're going to grow up to be, and the things that you love doing or the things that you're kind of mad and, passionate about at a really, really young age. And even at that, you're not self-aware at that age, of course, to know why you're doing those things. But again, in retrospect, it kind of all makes sense, right? Why you were so passionate about it. So you mentioned your mom. Tell me a little bit about your parents. What was your mom doing in the UK? When did they move to the UK? Or when did they kind of migrate?
Yeah, so my mum actually and my dad moved to the UK when they were quite young. So my mum moved when she grew up in Nigeria, but moved to the UK when she was around 21 or 22 and moved on her own. My dad had already been there for perhaps a few months to a year. And then she essentially left her family in Nigeria to move. And at the time she moved, she was actually pregnant with my older sister. And then a year and a half later, I came. And, Nigerian, comes to England, doesn't have any clear prospects ahead of her, well educated, a genius at mathematics, but her first job in Nigeria was, very menial. I mean, sorry, in England was very menial. And then I remember she eventually worked at something called a welcome break, which are these, I wouldn't call them gas stops or petrol stations, but they're these like when you're traveling long distance in London along the motorway, there are these kind of stops where you can get food, etc. So she worked there and then eventually made her way up to manager. And then at that whole period, she was also studying in the university, so University of East London, for a maths degree. She wanted to be a teacher. So she basically worked those jobs to be able to look after us while she was in education. And then eventually, she graduated and then she became a maths teacher, and that was her career. And my dad was, and both of my parents were entrepreneurs. So they kind of had a similar career to the career I had, like one hand in employment and the other hand, like always and constantly trying to build something. And so they actually, one of the reasons we went to Nigeria the first time is they were basically trying to start the equivalent of the first blockbusters in Nigeria.
Wow.
So yeah, it was basically rented this quite massive building. I remember I used to like run around and watch DVDs, video cassettes. And so yeah, they were entrepreneurs. They started the equivalent of the first blockbusters in Nigeria. And then later on, when I was older, around 13, 14, they started the first what was to be like African supermarket in Birmingham in England.
Wow.
So there's definitely like there was always like a view on entrepreneurship in the household.
Yeah, wow. No, that's interesting. And again, yes, you can definitely see that reflected in the work that you do now. So now we get to talk about the work that you actually do. You do. So let's talk about the platform or this digital community you've created, Kwanda. For those who are not familiar, what is it and how does it work?
Yeah, so the simple way to put it is Kwanda is a community of Africans in the diaspora, Caribbeans that are philanthropically minded and have essentially come together to pool their capital to fund social development, sustainable projects across Africa and soon within the diaspora. So those are the people. The platform basically facilitates those contributions going into funding projects, but does so in a transparent way. So when you ask, Africans in the diaspora, do you donate to charity at all? Do you contribute to projects happening in Africa or NGOs? The answer is typically no, because I don't know where my money's going. And so we basically solved this problem by creating, I think, one of, if not the only, entirely transparent financial flow for diasporans. So, you put your money in, you can see exactly how much we have collected, how much has gone to this project or that project. We also have a live feed on our website. And so our bank statements are basically digitized and updated in real time. So you can see everything from the fees we might pay on a transaction, to how much we paid salaries, to how much we pay for our Google Workspace account. So it's entirely transparent. And at any given moment, how much money has been collected, how much money is in the bank, how much money is being spent on software and all of these things. So that's essentially the platform. And I guess another key or two key features of the platform is collective decision making. And so anytime we decide to fund a project, let's say we want to erect a clean water pump in Tanzania, I would draft a proposal and share it with all our villages. Villages is what we call our members, because we call Kwanda the village. And I would share that and essentially say, hey, this is the thing we would like to do with, I don't know, $5,000 in our pot. Here is why I think it's important. Here are the people on the ground that are going to lead this project. We only invest in locals because we feel like everything needs to be contextually and relevant. And yeah, this is essentially like what we want to do. And so this proposal is out for you to all vote on. And if 50% of more people vote yes, then we go ahead and deploy that funding. And it's just a way to get sign off from the people that actually provide the funds. And then the second thing is reporting. So your typical approach to reporting, if you're an NGO or a traditional charity, is this massive impact report at the end of the year. And, that nobody reads those things, and you can kind of just make it up. Like, no one's going to really fact check whether it was 10,000 people you helped or 9,000 people. So what we do is, yeah, we do the impact reports. We do it on a quicker timeline, so quarterly. But the primary thing we do is we actually have a timeline feed under each project. So you can actually step through the unfolding of the project, whether it's day by day, week by week, month by month, and understand, okay, this is the time where the cash hit the bank account of the local leaders leading the project. This is some trouble they went into procuring materials, and everything's documented, there's videos, there's photos, and it's just a more natural way to understand how project is unfolding, which you just don't see.
No, that's a really interesting and unique model. And I know like what you've done is something that I think many people in the diaspora have tried to achieve in many different ways. But what I think, and in full transparency, I believe I'm a member. So not I believe I am a member. So, I've, had some kind of experience using, the, the platform or the community or being a part of it. In fact, I just voted, on a project, I think yesterday, a project in Haiti, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But so yes, I think it's a very seamless, like easy to use. The user experience feels seamless. And I think that's really hard to achieve, right? With something as kind of complex as this. I do commend you for doing that really well. So you talked a little bit about your inspiration, like why you started Quanda, right? How you kind of saw people giving. And I cheated and saw one of your LinkedIn posts where you were talking about, your experience um, witnessing how your parents gave back to the continent, back to Africa through remittances, that like in the form of a monthly um, whatever you'd like to call it, an allowance or amount that they sent every month back to Nigeria. Tell me a little bit about that experience and how that inspired Kwanda.
Yeah, so I think that particular, so like I mentioned, I grew up in a Nigerian household. Seeing my parents send money to Nigeria was just commonplace. I assumed when I assumed this is something every adult did. Like, you looked after your kids, you looked after yourself, but there was always someone somewhere in the world that needed your help. And the more you earn, the more you were able to help that person or community of people. So I thought this was just that everybody does this. I think my mom's friends did this. My friends, sorry, my friends' moms did this. My friends' dads did this. Um, and so I think there was naturally that sense in me that, okay, there are people in the world that need your help. And when you are in a position to help them, you will do that. Like, that's just a given. And I never really thought of it. And I don't know if it festered within me over time, but perhaps that's where this kind of philanthropic minded nature came from. And so, like I said, growing up in that environment was commonplace. And I was always just seeking. I was always just like, okay, what is the thing I'm going to do that either allows me to do that in a small way or in a large way? And so, yeah, I think I went through a career in technology as a product designer. And I was always thinking, okay, there's going to come a point in my career where I'm comfortable enough to be able to do the same thing that my parents did. And what happened eventually was I was beyond that point and I still didn't engage in that remittance flow. I was earning more than my mom was earning at the time, and there was still no sense of if I'm going to do this thing, why I'm going to do this thing, and how I'm going to do this thing. And it basically struck me that many like second generation diasporans are probably in a similar position to me, earning more than their parents, but contributing less or nothing at all. And the question was, but then at the same time, when I spoke to people in the diaspora, it's something they wanted to do. So I was like, okay, what's stopping this from happening? And I realized it's the lack of connection. It was like, I don't see this as imperative. So there isn't an urgency there. And when there isn't an urgency, you're likely not going to do the thing. Um, but we all have this kind of higher level sense of there is some sort of injustice happening that's directly affecting our home countries, and someone needs to do something about it. And am I one of those people? So we were kind of straddling these two things. This high level, there's an injustice happening in the world. I feel like I should be playing a role in correcting it, given I am from X country, whether that's Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania.
Mhm.
Uh, my parents seem to be doing something. Um, and where does that leave me? Like, what is my role to play here? I have kind of climbed the ladder in whichever Western country I've ended up in. And there's still this nagging sense that there's more that needs to be done, or I'm not quite at home. Um, and so I think all of those things really came together and really led me to where I am today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, an experience that I can identify with. Although, you grew up in England and obviously I spent most of my childhood here in the States, but I think that kind of angst and or kind of the confusion about what is my role in the continent's development because I'm culturally attached to some extent, but I'm not fully culturally attached because I wasn't born on the soil. So what does that mean for me? I think it's something that we all kind of like grapple with as I call it bicultural kids or children of immigrants living in the West. And I think what makes Kwanda's timing so great, or what makes it such a timely venture, I think, is what's happening with aid. And I want to talk a little bit about foreign aid and kind of I don't know if you could call it like safety nets that have been taken away
Yeah.
with foreign aid, and that does open up this kind of space for diasporans to step in and say, how do we mobilize and how do we, um, you know, put together our resources to replace kind of this void that aid will be leaving. So I think it's a really, really there couldn't be a better time to launch such a venture, in my opinion. Do you feel the same way, or do you kind of feel like you're still struggling to convince people that this is the right time to have a platform like this?
Yes, so I personally think the right time to have had a platform like this was way before we found ourselves in the position we find ourselves now. Now there's a level of urgency. I think many of us have had the sense that these channels of capital aren't one as effective as they could be, primarily because they're not entirely for us. I think if you flipped it around and one example is Ukraine, like how quickly and effectively capital was mobilized when there was a crisis there, and how quickly that capital was taken away from focuses in Africa, for example. And so I think the fact that that capital was so easily shifted, and the fact that the capital has, even in this moment, been so easily pulled, means that it wasn't as sticky in the first place. Like capital that's doing real work in a real effective way isn't that easy to just turn off. And so I think this is just further evidence of like historical ineffectiveness of that capital. And so yeah, I think this moment has created a sense of urgency for sure. And it's hard to convince people that these are the right platforms to exist for two reasons. One is because the history of aid, and I don't want to say aid hasn't helped, but it's helped whilst destroying something very different, which is the perception people have of Africans
Yes.
on the continent and in the diaspora. And so a lot of people, myself included, are actually just turned off by the word, the vehicle in the first place, whether it's working or not. There always is a sense of there has to be something better. I don't care how well it's working. Aid doesn't make me feel good. That word doesn't make me feel good. For that reason, it's hard to convince people that this is something that we should actually take ownership of. And the actual problem is that we are not the ones leading the charge on how this aid is deployed and disseminated. And then the other thing is the rise of the tech scene, both in across Africa and in the US. You have your Silicon Valley. There is this new sense that, okay, the way to generate prosperity is through investments into technology and capital markets. And this is very true. I agree with this entirely. But what happens is we miss out on the fact that there's a whole ecosystem that needs to be developed, which includes free healthcare, free education, includes scientific grants, includes loans, small business loans, large organization loans, and then large venture capital. And I think what's happening right now is it's like a twofold attack. Is like one, people are like, I'm completely tired of aid. Don't mention that word around me. It doesn't work. And then the other thing is if I'm going to put my money in anything at all, it's going to be in technology. And I think that is probably a development. It's a better view. It's coming from it's a better place than where we were before, but it's not seeing the full picture. And I think there's still just education that needs to be done around what an entire and healthy ecosystem looks like.
No, totally. And that's a very interesting point. And if I understand what you're saying, essentially, there's like this kind of intersection between like profitability and aid that needs to kind of happen, right? I think people are falling on one extreme or the other. So it's either like I'm fully in the aid space and I'm pumping money into the continent. And there's this other thing like, well, that's not working. So let me just go full investment capitalist. And what a social enterprise does is kind of, basically merges those two things or finds kind of the intersection and the commonality to create something even bigger. And another interesting point that you made that I think people often overlook is that yes, aid was working, foreign aid was working in some sense, but because we didn't own it, to your point, it wasn't as effective as it could be. It wasn't as culturally effective, because we weren't the owners of it. And again, that's what Kwanda is essentially doing, right? It's not. Um, kind of dismantling the aid model, but it's putting it in the hands of new owners, the rightful owners, basically, which are people in the diaspora and people of color themselves. So I think that's a really interesting distinction. Like that aid is not about the efficacy, but about who actually owns it and controls it. And because it hasn't been controlled by us for so long, it hasn't been as effective as it could be had we owned it from the beginning. So Kwanda essentially puts it in the hands of the people who actually have cultural, emotional, familial ties to the continent.
Exactly.
You should put me in your you should make me one of your ambassadors.
I know. It's like I couldn't put it better myself.
So let's talk a little bit about the projects that you chosen under Kwanda. Obviously, as you said, those who are members of the community, villagers, right? That's how we refer to them. So people like me who joined this Kwanda community, we get to vote on these projects. But let's talk a little bit about your selection criteria for you as a platform. How do you choose these projects in the first place for us to vote to? Like, how do you select those? What are your criteria?
Yeah, so in terms of how we select them, first of all, like how we find these projects, we actually source them proactively. And this is just because we have such a new and unique selection criteria that many don't kind of fall into that or recognize themselves as being able to get funding for us. So we actually have to go and almost sell our funding in some sense. And so there are a few things that kind of underline our core criteria. One of them is locally led, meaning the people leading the project have to be embedded in the communities they're serving. Another one is innovative, meaning almost no one else is doing the thing you're doing to bring forth this solution to a problem. And innovative doesn't necessarily mean, you're sending rockets off to Mars or anything. It just means you're doing things one click beyond how they're typically done. And so an example I could give is, and innovative also kind of measures in with circular, like it's locally empowering. It's empowering the people in the community to take on the solutions themselves. And so it's not a solution where if you lead, it's not happening anymore. And I can give two examples. One of them is period poverty. So typically the problem is we have girls in a rural community, they don't have access to period products, and so they miss school. That's the problem. And the typical solution is, oh, I live in New York, or I live in London, or I live in Amsterdam. I'm going to buy a bunch of products that I have easy access to from this multinational, and then I'm going to ship it over, and the girls get to go to school. What the issue with this is very logistically complex and expensive, and you have to keep doing this. So as soon as you stop for whatever reason, maybe you run out of money or you're too busy, the girls are now in a dependent position. And this, when people encounter this problem of period poverty, this is typically their first solution. And so what we fund rather is a program whereby the people leading the program actually have learned how to produce the period products themselves with organic cotton that are reusable. And then they train local women to basically produce these products and give it to the girls. And therefore, and it does a few things. One is it creates it creates an income for the local women. Two, the girls are intimately connected to the women producing the product. So they can almost adjust it on the fly and say, hey, I use the product, this didn't work, that didn't work. I'd like it this way. I found it difficult cleaning it. And then you couple that with education as well. So we have people go into schools and basically empower the girls, teach them about hygiene and also how to keep these products clean because they are reusable. And then essentially you get this thing that goes on indefinitely. This value that's produced indefinitely. And something interesting that's actually happening in that particular project is the girls are then saying, oh, I want to learn how to produce these products. So when I get older, I can have the same impact that this woman has had on me. So it's creating this kind of circular economy. And then what's happening is, one, the girls are able to stay in school. Each product gives them 35 days back in school. And two, locals and people in the wider community are saying, what's going on here? I want my daughter to have access to these products. And so the women are actually making those products and selling them. And so now they've been able to create this local income, and we were able to step out, and it's just still happening. So that's one example. And the final example I'd give is clean water pumps. So a big issue with clean water is, a large NGO comes in, they bring in these huge trucks, they drill a clean water pump, they install all of these fancy things like solar and mechanical pumps. And then one day, one component breaks and the entire thing is useless because no one in the local community knows how to fix this component. And so we funded an organization in Tanzania whereby so they take the technology down a notch and they actually manually drill these holes, but they train the entire community on installing it. And so if it ever does break, the people that actually installed it are just a few minutes away from the actual pump. And so when we say innovation, that's the sort of thing we're looking for. And it's not as common as you'd imagine it is. And so it's locally relevant, um, innovative, circular, empowering. And those are kind of the core things. And then also like sustainable, like can this go on into the future without our funding? So yeah, those are a few things that kind of come together in the matrix.
No, that's awesome. I think those are two really solid examples of kinds of projects, as you said, led by locals, quite innovative and sustainable. Seems to be like kind of, those seem to be the main criteria. So that's interesting. I want you to talk a little bit about the fact that you've extended now your reach to the Caribbean, correct? Correct. You were only focused on Africa on the beginning, but you most recently extended and now doing projects in the Caribbean. I don't know if you're at liberty to talk about the projects that we're voting on. Let me know if you're not.
Yeah, I can talk about that for sure.
Sure. Well, I was, the project in Haiti that we're currently voting on. I think it'd be nice to hear a little bit more about that and some other projects you're doing in the Caribbean that
Yeah, sure.
are seeking funding.
Yeah, sure. So historically, we have done stuff in the Caribbean, but no actual product projects. So all we've done is solidarity funding. So for example, many years ago when there was flooding in Jamaica, we donated money to help with that. Similarly, I think there was the volcanic eruptions in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We donated to help with that. And that basically brought in a lot of people from the Caribbean diaspora. And so inevitably there was this sense that, okay, we have Africans and Caribbeans in this community, and a lot of countries in the Caribbeans are similarly structured to countries in Africa when you think about some of the issues. And so we thought, given our model and how almost modularized our projects are, there is no reason why a project that works in Uganda can't work in Jamaica, or Barbados or Haiti. And so recently, so we made the announcement a while ago that we will be extending our funding into the Caribbean, and we consider the Caribbean, a part of the diaspora ultimately. But it's been quite hard to get to the point where we're actually erecting a project. Projects are like interestingly much harder to get set up than you think. You think it's just like, hey, you've got the funding. There's so many people that are doing projects, just
Mhm.
send it out. Or kind of forming a project that fits our criteria and we can also see as um, like a long term project is really hard to do. So we finally met these two guys, Hector and Jill,
Mhm.
a month or two ago now, and both were childhood friends, grew up in Haiti, and taught themselves Haiti French speaking. They taught themselves how to speak English. They taught themselves basic science, and then eventually both got scholarships to study abroad. So leave it was Norway and I forget the other country, but they both went to two different European countries to study, and essentially were like equivalent geniuses, and now are both at Princeton and MIT. And what they had this journey that took them from Haiti to Europe and then to the US at prestigious colleges, and thought there are so many people like ourselves in Haiti that given a similar opportunity would do the exact same thing. And so they decided to set up an organization called the Hector Foundation. And it was really a STEM operation. And it eventually opened Haiti's first makerspace, which is just a space with a bunch of equipment and tools where people can come in and do robotics or science. And they opened that in 2020 and then started a series of programs. So one of them was Project Manus, which was the makerspace. Another one was Drill, which was essentially I guess you call it a semester of robotics learning, beginner robotics learning, where 120 students came in, learned robotics, and then graduated with certificates. And the idea was that we could then use that to bolster college applications for these students to go to colleges in the US or Europe, as well as foster the opportunity for them to get into internships. And so when I heard the story, I was amazed because Haiti's not the easiest place to set up something like that. And they managed to do it whilst traveling between Haiti and the US. And of course, you see the recent ban on Haiti, which makes that a bit more difficult. But they still kind of worked around all of these things to provide opportunities to young Haitians. And they were basically trying to have those young Haitians experience the same thing they did. So it's actually local in two ways. It's like they had the childhood experience in Haiti and then the experience of moving over to the States. And they were basically helping people go through that entire funnel. So we partnered with them and said, hey, what we're gonna actually help you do is strengthen that second part, which is people have got beginner robotic skills. How do they get the advanced skills that will really allow them to shine in regards to college applications? And so we're funding as a pilot. Like I mentioned earlier, all our projects, we aim for them to be long-term. So we want to be working with these guys for 10 years on their goals, but we typically start projects with a pilot. And so the pilot we're starting with the Hector Foundation is essentially an extended program on top of their existing drill program, which moves from beginner robotics to advanced robotics. And the first thing we're doing is funding a 2-week robotics camp where 20 graduates from their existing drill program who showed promise will then come on board and get this advanced robotics training. And they'll be building these Segway style robots that can basically drive on their own on 2 wheels and engineering and fabricating the entire thing. And then at the end, there'll be a demo. So hopefully soon we'll be showing our villagers the robots that they built.
Awesome. That's pretty remarkable. Yeah, that project caught my eye, and I just wanted you to touch on it because you're right. It's coming out of a market that you wouldn't expect it to come out of. So you touched on this a little bit, but let's talk about like the challenges as you kind of mentioned it in passing, but you talked about the fact that you think that if you go into a market, into a country, and you say, "Hey, I have funding from the diaspora to fund a project," you think people would just come lining up, right, um, to apply for it or to get a piece of the pie, so to speak. Why do you think people aren't like jumping on this opportunity? Why do you feel like there's like they need to be kind of educated or coaxed into doing it? Meaning the people who could benefit from this funding.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess the one distinction I'd like to make is we that criteria I mentioned means there is a limited pool. And so to answer the question, or even rephrase the question, which is like, why aren't people readapting their approach, giving this the funding we're providing, right? And saying, actually, yeah, I do want to do something more sustainable. And I think it's a dependency thing. It's that a lot of funders in the past have said, hey, we just want you to get a certain number on the board and we'll fund you. And so that thinking is really entrenched. And so even when we present our model and say, hey, look, this is the thing we're funding, it's more dignified, we want to work with you long term, people are just hearing that for the first time. And the nature of nonprofits is you're dealing with a range of funders. And so everything starts to sound the same, even if we're saying something different. So when we're saying, hey, we're trying to do this thing that's different, like we're going to be partners with you. We want you to not have to think about fundraising. We're not just going to give you 10K at once. We're going to be able to give you 2K every month indefinitely. People are like, okay. And they're not quite hearing that we're saying something that's very different. And so I think that's part of the issue. It's just the typical approach is so dominant. And so people almost can't believe it. And it's when I get on a call with a lot of organizations that they kind of realize that, and it's like, oh wow, yeah, this is really important because the struggle we've had is X and you're proposing Y. Um, and this is something that happens on, like, I'd say 9 out of 10 calls that I have with people that are eventually partners, is they realize midway through that, oh, this is the thing we were asking for 10 years ago, but for the 9 years after that, we just have never encountered it. So we forgot that it was a thing. And so it was like, oh, wow. So I think something like that happened.
No, no, I think that's really interesting. Like, it's something that you needed that you forgot that you needed, right? And then
Yeah.
presents that model to you. Go, oh yes, and this model does make sense because it fulfills this thing that I'd asked for 8 years ago, and now here it's being presented to me. And also, it's being led by people who have a cultural connection, mostly by people who have a cultural connection to this place that I'm building this thing in. So no, that's really interesting. I want to just like go. I know we have a few more minutes. I just want to make sure that we're touching on some other key things. So we're gonna have a little fun in the end, but I may start a war by doing this. But you did mention in one of your LinkedIn posts that the reception of Kwanda by diasporans in the UK feels a little different than the reception of Kwanda by diasporans in the US. Can you talk a little bit about that without starting a war? About like kind of nuances in the markets when you approach diaspora in the UK or even any other part of Europe, what's the general kind of reaction compared with, let's say, diasporans in the US?
Yeah. So this is still a work in theory. I think there's something around conservativeness. But to paint a picture of what I touched on in the LinkedIn post, you know, we were born in the UK as an organization. We've built up a lot of goodwill, especially in London. Like you meet a diasporan in London and you say Kwanda, and it's very likely they know what Kwanda is. But we noticed um we started just advertising in the UK. And so this was paid ads one, and then just me talking, meeting people, which of course I didn't do any of in the US because I physically wasn't there. And then we started doing the paid ads in the US as well. And we noticed that the rate of people in the US joining was just far more rapid. And also their rate of engagement in the community, like their likeliness to reach out to me and say, hey, I met this person, you should talk to them, or hey, I know this person that could contribute to Kwanda, you should talk to them, was way higher. And, you know, if Kwanda started today from scratch and we were marketing as we are right now, it would be overwhelmingly diasporans in the US. And so I think, and this is a working through, but I think there are a few reasons. I think one is that racism, like injustice, is such a day-to-day part of the American experience. It's something you're constantly thinking about in some ways. It's something that's always a looming problem that needs to be solved. Whereas I think in the UK, it is there at a lower simmer and then it pops its head up very aggressively in moments. And so I think in the UK, there's a lack of urgency. There is a sense that this solution is cool, but we're not doing too like you don't need it. It's not like, you know, like we're not in a dire situation. And like it's cool. I like the idea. At some point in the future, I'll get onto it. And then if there's a crisis, of course, there will be like a. But I think with Americans, there's a sense of, oh, we we've been, or diasporans in America, they're like, oh, this is very important. We've been waiting for it. You presented it, and we're gonna jump on it. So yeah, I think it's an urgency thing. I think also in the US there's a larger appetite for risk, and there's more excitement around new ideas. So yeah, it's one that I'm still trying to figure out. The data just shows that it far more resonates with people in the US, or that the people in the US are more likely to join up and contribute.
No, I think that's interesting. That's an interesting observation, and I would agree as someone who, as I said, grew up in an immigrant community in the US, and I have cousins and relatives who grew up in the UK and Birmingham and, Southampton, other parts. I
Okay.
I think I would agree with those nuances, and I'm sure they would probably, challenge me to that, but I think it's true. I think there's a sense of urgency because of the political climate in the US, the social climate, people of color in the US, specifically, um, children of immigrants do have a sense of like, where else can we make an impact? Because
Yeah.
our impact is not always appreciated in here. So what is that? Where's the other place? Another thing that I think we can't discount is like the cultural um, pride that's, I think, swelling up in both the UK and the US among children of immigrants, which is brought about mostly by entertainment and music. I think we are like something like Afrobeats and the rise of Afrobeats in the US and the growing popularity among, what we call first gen or you call second gen, kids in the US and the UK. There's this sense of like, oh, now I have a connection. It's not my parents'
Yeah.
connections
Yeah.
country, but through music, through Davido, whoever I'm listening to, I can kind of relate to my home country or my parents' home country. And in the US, that's really, really heightened. In the UK too, I think to a certain extent. But in the US, that's really heightened. So I think that sense of cultural pride coupled with the sense of urgency that so many Black Americans are feeling,
Mm.
um, in this social and political climate, I think probably is why the reception in the US seems a little bit more heightened, I think, at this time. But I think it'll switch as time goes by. I think it just kinda it's where each nation is at that given point that kind of, determines that. So, before we go into, like, the fun stuff, I wanna just, talk a little bit about have a little bit of banter about, your travel experiences and all that. Let's just tell people where if they want to join Kwanda today, what should they do? How do they go about doing that?
Okay, so the best way to do it is to go to our website, kwanda.co, not .com, .co. Because I've noticed a lot of people reach out to me and they say, Kwanda's amazing, and they've never been on the website. So I guess I'm doing a good job talking about it. But yeah, today I realized, oh, it's interesting. Like half of the people that know about Kwanda but never actually seen what we do. So definitely check out the website, kwanda.co.
Co. Okay. So yes, remember that Kwanda.co, not com, co.co. And when once I get on the website, what like so if I want to be part of the community, do I just simply go on? Is it do I sign up for free? What is the kind of the best?
Yes, the website does a good job of basically walking you into the village. So you go on the website, if you know what we do, which is pool capital to fund social projects, of which you'd need to contribute a minimum of $5 to be a part of, then you can just click join the village and you'll be walked through that process. But otherwise, the best thing is to actually click learn more. And then it will basically explain to you exactly how Kwanda works. And as I mentioned just now, to be a member of the village, you have to make what we call the village pledge or contribution, of which the minimum is $5, but it can go as high as you want. And then that basically gives you your voting rights. And from that point on, you're able to make decisions as to how the collective finances are spent.
Absolutely. Thank you. So now let's get into some a little fun little trivia thing here that we're doing. We're calling it borderless banter, but that's like a work in progress name. So you can name it better since so there's one country that's a predominantly black country anywhere in the world that you'd recommend that anyone visit before they leave this earth. Which country would that be?
I mean, it's the country I'm sorry, I'm going to give two answers, but for two reasons. So, Kenya, I would say for sure, just because it's a beautiful country and it's a really good example of Africans holding on to their culture and aesthetic, but creating new and beautiful things out of it. There's so many times where you're in a building and it's just so well designed and the environment and the experience is so well designed, but it's not like something stolen from Scandinavian countries. It's like very African. So for that reason, and then Nigeria is just a country everyone has to see. Like, yeah, I can't explain why or what you'll see when you get there, but everyone has to sit in the back of a car in Lagos and just watch.
As they say, you just have to be there, right? You just got it's just
They say it's an assault on the senses, like smell, hearing, everything. You need to experience Nigeria.
awesome, awesome, awesome. And then last question, who's your favorite artist? Black artist, I should say. Musician, visual artist, doesn't matter. Any
I'm just gonna go straight to music right now.
yeah.
Uh, and it's gonna be a common answer about Wizkid.
Wizkid. Oh, your what's it called? FC? What's
FC, Wizkid FC. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wizkid FC? You're Wizkid FC. Oh, okay. You're one of those. Why Wizkid? What's like the
You know, one, it's the longevity. I've been listening to Wizkid since like the Dirt Door days. So, and then two, there's I don't know how to explain it, but his music has evolved into this place where there's a kind of classiness to it, which is almost creating something new that you would typically see as not accessible to Africans. It's kind of like, I don't know, I would call it something like Afrobeats coming to where jazz was or classical music was. And he's bringing in some of these like rich instruments into his music that I've just really been enjoying, because now I don't feel like, okay, I need to go and listen to Beethoven to get a bit of a violin going or wherever it might be. So yeah, for that reason, Wizkid.
So yeah, that's a total other, like a whole, we can have a full episode just talking about that, because I do have my opinion on that, but I'm not going to share it today because we can get into a Wizkid David Doe debate today if I get into it. But that's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. I am also a Wizkid fan, but I also have some reservations about what you said about,
Okay, interesting.
global, but maybe sometimes gone too global. Hopefully
I see.
I'm popular one day and he hears me bash
I'm biased.
evolution. But yes, but no, fair enough. Well, Jermaine, this has been great. Thank you. Again, thank you for being our very first guest on Black and Borderless. We're pretty honored, and we can't wait to see how Kwanda grows and all the great things that happen with it. So thank you again for joining us. It's been great.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining our very, very first episode of Black and Borderless. We're so excited that you could join us. Please like it, share it with as many people as you can, and be sure to subscribe on all podcast platforms. See you next time. Bye.